welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Kanell, that's Bud Elliott, that's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson, coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Fired up to get you set for week 2 in the Big Ten with some big-time non-conference matchups. Before we get out of here, we are going to be giving you the keys to the game, the X factors going inside the matchup of Michigan's big trip to Oklahoma, Oregon taking on Oklahoma State on CBS at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, as well as Illinois' trip to Duke and everyone's favorite rivalry, the Cy-Hawk Trophy, Iowa and Iowa State. Before we get rocking and rolling, especially with a look at the Oregon Ducks, a little bit of a question of the moment, one that won't be that relevant in a couple hours, but at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we will get a new AP Top 25. And since number 1 Texas has lost, there will be a debate, because when you look at the preseason poll from the AP Top 25, you had Texas get 25 first-place votes. You had Penn State get 23 first-place votes. Ohio State got 11 first-place votes. That leads me to believe, Danny Kanell, that we've got ourselves a little debate, and it's between 2 Big Ten rivals. So Penn State or Ohio State, there are 2 questions here. Danny, who will be number 1? Who should be number 1?
Ohio State will be number 1. I mean, and this is where I actually have no problem with that whatsoever, because I want to see teams that play somebody. And I think beating Texas is still a really good win. It's a significantly better win than beating Nevada. So from that standpoint, I think it should be Ohio State. I would even make a case for LSU, who's outside the Big Ten, that they had the most impressive win of the weekend. If you erased all your expectations, if you erased everything you knew about the teams coming in, I think LSU had the best win of the weekend. But I would think Ohio State comes in there and checks in at number 1 because of what they did, making Arch Manning look human, dominating that game. There were some question marks, some things they definitely have to get figured out. Julian saying didn't ask him to do a whole lot because they didn't have to. Jeremiah Smith, couple drop balls, who we've touted on here as the best football player in the country. He can get better. But I think Ohio State will probably be number 1.
Is Danny stumping for an SEC team right now? Like,
Yeah,
I can't
that?
believe my entire world is spinning like Bill Belichick's on the sideline last night as his team was getting its butt kicked by TCU. I am also thinking that Ohio State will be the number 1 team in the country in the poll because, Chip, as you mentioned, a number of teams got first-place votes in the preseason poll. The gaps between them were not very far apart. And now that Ohio State's taken down Texas, I think the logical response we'll see from the voters is for them to then take Ohio State and give them Texas's first place votes from the preseason poll, which would then put the Buckeyes at number 1. And I think that they should be, because if you argue about what the most impressive win of the weekend was, based on rankings anyway, it was Ohio State. Now, they didn't exactly look all that impressive in that win, as much as Texas looked bad and couldn't win the game against them. But I think that just based on the resume, based on the fact that everybody was watching that game, it's pretty clear to me that Ohio State will be number 1.
Yeah, I really think there are so many teams who could be number 1. We have the most wide open season that we have seen in a long time. If you look at the current betting odds out there, everybody is 6-1 or greater. There's nobody who distinguished themselves in the opening weekend as the clear number 1 team that everybody else is gunning for. Great win by Ohio State. Obviously, a great weekend overall for the Big Ten for the most part in terms of positioning teams for the playoff. But I think there are so many teams you could make a case for. Ohio State, Penn State, LSU all look really good, and several teams also crushed their FCS opponents as well, which, you don't take much from it, but that's something a good team should do.
Hey, but let's overreact to it, Bud, because crushing an FCS opponent can also allow us to learn a little bit more about your team. And what Oregon did to Montana State was clinical. And now we get a step up in competition, because this Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, you can watch it on CBS. You can stream it on Paramount Plus. Big Time will feature the Oregon Ducks, the reigning Big Ten champs, welcoming in Oklahoma State. Now, we had already planned to go inside the matchup here today with our time in the Cover 3 podcast on CBS Sports Network, but then we got a little bit of spice. We got a little bit of sizzle. Because Mike Gundy, first on the radio show, discussed Oregon's spending. Then he was asked to follow up at a press conference, and he didn't totally double down as hard as he went the first time. but certainly was indicating that Oregon maybe just bought their way to this much talent and success. But it is the response from Oregon's Dan Lanning that I'd love to share with you right here.
Listening to him talk, like I said, I got a ton of respect for Coach Gundy. Ultimately, how blessed are we to be in a place that's invested in winning? If you want to be a top 10 team in college football, you better be invested in winning. And we spend to win. Some people save to have an excuse for why they don't, right? And ultimately, like, he's a great coach. They've done an unbelievable job, but I want to be a team that's competing at the highest level. And we're really fortunate to be in that situation. So I can't speak on their situation. I have no idea, what they got in their pockets over there. I'm sure UT Martin maybe didn't have as much as them last week, and they played. So we'll let it play out.
Thank you, Dan. I do appreciate that. Bud, knowing the way these rosters are built, knowing what we have in terms of the data, the projections, there is a large gap between these two teams. But where is Oregon's roster right now? Let's look, sort of spotlight the Ducks. They are, without a doubt, as we know, by a 28.5-point spread, very far away from Oklahoma State. But where is Oregon in relation to the other top teams? Because if we are to overreact to the way that Dante Moore played, the way that some of those young players looked, the depth that was on display as they continued to be efficient deep into the game, and even comments from Montana State's coach after the game at just really being impressed by what he saw on the other sideline. Where is Oregon's roster in your estimation in terms of being ready to go make a run at a national championship?
Chip, I would say it's potentially right there, but I need to see more. Specifically here on the offensive side of the ball. Nice debut for Dante Moore. They used a variety of running backs. Mekhi Hughes, the transfer from Tulane, barely played. DeCorian Moore, true freshman receiver, who's probably going to be the best true freshman receiver in the country. He was a 5-star for us at 24/7 Sports and the best overall receiver in the class, in my opinion. But what are receivers 2 and 3 going to look like when they play some teams with real athletes? How's this offensive line going to hold up against a better pass rush than what Montana State offered? I think there's still a lot of questions about Oregon, but also a lot of promise. That they're a team we'll be watching a lot early in the season for us to be able to figure out, okay, just how good can these guys be this year from a program and talent acquisitions, and building standpoint. There's no doubt that Oregon is built to last. It's just, are they built, to finish like in the last week of the season this year? I think that's still TBD.
Tom, when you've got the asterisk of sorts when in our analysis of trying to understand what we can and cannot take away. Montana State 15-1 last year, national runner-up at the FCS level, but at the FCS level, what were some of your takeaways from what you saw from the Ducks?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to the Mike Gundy, Dan Lanning thing real quick. Where was Mike? Why wasn't Mike Gundy complaining about money in college football while T. Boone Pickens was still alive and he was spending every single offseason flirting with open jobs to get a raise at Oklahoma State? Why didn't the money matter then? Why is it such a big deal now, Mike? That's one thing I'm wondering. As for what to take away from Oregon's win against Montana State, like you mentioned, Montana State's a good FCS program, and we have seen FCS programs give teams trouble. Last year, in the season opener, Idaho gave Oregon trouble. It was a 24-14 game. So to see them come out and play as clean as they did, considering all the new pieces that they have at key spots, I think it's an encouraging sign. Whether or not we could take a whole lot away from it, I don't know if we should. Like, this is a team that came out, they ran the ball 60% of the time in the game, and we wondered this offseason if the change in Oregon's offense with the new quarterback would be we see them lean into the run game a bit more, especially after the Evan Stewart injury. So it looked like that in this game, but that could be far more related to the game script than anything else. The most interesting thing of the game for me came from something Bud just mentioned, the fact that Mekhi Hughes was one of the top transfers in the offseason. He comes from Tulane. We thought he was going to have a big season for Oregon, and he barely played in this one. He did not start. Noah Whittington got the first snap of the game, had a nice big run. Mekhi Hughes finished with one rush, one catch, and really nothing else. And they've been kind of mum about the reasoning behind it. So I'm assuming it's a disciplinary issue, and I'm wondering, will we see him a lot more in this week's game against Oklahoma State? Because he is a very talented player, and I think that when you look at how the run game looked overall, you add him to it this week, this is an Oregon offense that might be pretty explosive on the ground.
Danny, when you've got Dante Moore, go ahead.
I was going to follow up and say I would imagine you'll see a lot more Mekhi Hughes. Might be in one of those situations where you're able to take a disciplinary approach, send a message to him, whatever it was that he wasn't playing. You're able to send a message, get that wake-up call. And I thought the Oregon Ducks were one of those teams where you just got an A. Like, it might have been an easier test, but you got an A on the test. And, I mean, Mateo Ungale delivered. We knew he was a special player. But Dante Moore, I think we have to remember, he's not your average kind of first-year starter because he didn't play last year. He did play as a true freshman at UCLA, and I really was optimistic about what this year could bring because sometimes you need a year, a redshirt, reset type of year. And for him to be able to watch Dillon Gabriel, I think had to have been invaluable for him to watch somebody who had played more college football than anybody else. Not only the way he handles the media, leadership, play calling, in-game, but just the totality of it, preparation, off the field, little things that you're supposed to do as a starting quarterback, the face of your franchise. I think that could have proved very valuable for Dante Moore. And his stats, I know it's easier competition, but that was very, very efficient without many mistakes at all. I thought he really, really impressed.
Bo Nix had 2 years with Oregon, and we saw the real jump there in year 2. I know they had some coaching changes along the way, but just in terms of getting comfortable, understanding exactly what the goal is, what you're trying to do. Will Stein did great jobs with Bo Nix year 2, Dillon Gabriel his 1 year there. Now Dante Moore leading that offense. Again, it is Oregon hosting Oklahoma State. 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:30 local out in Eugene. You can watch Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson, Jenny Dell on the call on CBS or stream it on Paramount Plus. Well, coming up on the other side, it is a statement game for the Big Ten. As Michigan goes on the road to take on Oklahoma, we go inside the matchups, tell you where this game will be decided, look at our 2 new quarterbacks, give you X factors and more. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast as we continue to get you set for week 2 in the Big Ten. And they don't get much bigger in week 2 than the matchup between Oklahoma and Michigan. Now, the Wolverines have to go on the road to Norman after a 34-17 win against New Mexico. One where, sure, the final margin did not necessarily show a lopsided result, but to my eyes, at least, I thought Bryce Underwood checked a lot of boxes. So did John Mateer. 4 total touchdowns, nearly 400 yards passing. Let's keep it on the quarterbacks right here. Would love to hear from everybody. DK first. How do you see each of these quarterbacks after getting the first look of each of them with their new teams in week 1?
So I thought that John Mateer was I thought we got what we expected. There was more known. I thought he was the best target this offseason in the portal. The fact that he comes in there with Ben Arbuckle as offensive coordinator, I pretty much thought we would get that. Now, on the flip side with Bryce Underwood, I thought they would have run him more. They didn't run him that much. I think you could potentially see that something they were saving possibly for this matchup. You also gave him a ground game that Mateer did not have. So that was a huge luxury piece to have where you were able to get Justice Haynes going. He went for close to $150. That opens up things so much for Bryce Underwood to be more comfortable. But you do want to see, how do you look on that stage? I thought he looked comfortable. I thought he looked poised. But it's going to be a completely different atmosphere. And then kind of the flip side, yes, we got what we wanted out of John Mateer, but the thing that I think was significantly lacking was their inability to run the football. So that to me is, both of these quarterbacks are going to be compared. And I think you could go in and you could potentially see Michigan winning a game without Bryce Underwood lighting it up. But after seeing that first game, I think this puts a lot of pressure on John Mateer to have to deliver against that Michigan defense.
Yeah, Danny, I think both opposing defensive coordinators are probably licking their chops and for different reasons. If you're Oklahoma's DC, you're like, okay, it's Michigan with an offensive line that's questionable, with receivers that don't really scare us all that much, and with a true freshman quarterback who looks like an absolute stud, but he's still a true freshman who just turned 18. Playing Oklahoma in Oklahoma is a little bit different than playing New Mexico. But yeah, if you're a Michigan fan, you were just over the moon about how good Underwood look and how many different throws he was able to execute. Touch throws, laser throws, stuff on time, throws on the move. We said on this show before, he's not Cam Newton, but he might be like the best, stylistically since Cam. And I think you saw a lot of that. If you're Michigan, you're watching Mateer, you're like, man, this guy makes a lot of plays, but there's also a lot of plays he doesn't see. And like, can we force this dude to make plays in structure? I bet you Oklahoma's internal grade on Mateer is far lower than what his surface level stats show. Because if you watch the tape and you get the all 22, I know Danny, and we put it in the group chat today, there's a lot of stuff. There's like, oof, okay. Like against a good team, you need to hit this guy. You need to hit this guy on time, and he just never saw it. So, and it would make a dangerous throw into coverage. So, we'll see how much that gets corrected. I think the concerning thing for Oklahoma fans is this is not a new offense for him. Same offensive coordinator came over, Ben Arbuckle, from Washington State to Oklahoma with him. So, Mateer should really hit the ground running there as far as seeing guys and hitting them on time. That was a little bit concerning. So, I bet you this game maybe a little defensive sided.
We were discussing during the break our fantasy football drafting philosophies, and I take a much more of an analytical, statistical kind of model for the way I do it. And Chip and Danny were talking about they were very vibes-based with their drafting. John Mateer is very vibes-based when he's playing quarterback. As Bud mentioned, there is a lot of stuff he doesn't see, but he's also able to improvise a lot, keep plays going, extend, and then make them either with his arm or his legs. And that is going to be something that Michigan will be aware of and be game planning around it. Maybe try to keep John Mateer in the pocket, maybe try to make him make reads and progress, and don't let him scramble and buy time. But the other problem that Oklahoma is facing in here, which you touched on, Danny, like Oklahoma's offensive line struggling to get push in the run game against Illinois State, probably not a great sign. I think that Michigan's defensive line might be slightly better than what they saw against the Redbirds last week, so that is definitely something to keep in mind. I wouldn't be surprised if Wink Martindale, the Michigan defensive coordinator, brings a little extra pressure to just get Mateer into making mistakes, because we saw while Mateer was at Washington State last year putting up crazy numbers, when he played better defenses, he was more prone to making mistakes. So that'll be something to watch out for in this one. As far as the Michigan side, I thought the offense was pretty encouraging, what you saw with Bryce Underwood. I am worried about the still seemingly over-reliance on tight ends. The wide receivers were not nearly as prolific in their passing attack last season or last week as their tight ends were. Whether that's just Bryce Underwood's comfortability within the offense and he's still willing to grow in it, I don't know yet. But I do think there were a lot of encouraging signs that you saw from him. You got all the flashes of why he was so highly rated out of high school. But now this is a very different beast, because you're not at home against a surprisingly solid New Mexico team anymore. You're on the road against Oklahoma. And for all the problems I think their offense might have, that defense is good. And the defense is very good. And you're going to be playing in a loud, hostile environment, probably nothing like Underwood has seen before. How is he going to handle that?
If you are, so Michigan edge rusher Jayshon Barham had his targeting call upheld by the NCAA, which yuck. Sorry to editorialize. We already discussed this on the Cover 3 podcast on the Instant Reaction Show on Saturday night. So you won't have Barham for the first half. He will be getting in after halftime. For Michigan on the road defensively, Tom, you talk about Wink Martindale. We've lost a lot of the stars from that Michigan defense over the last couple of years. How's that personnel shaping up right now from the same teams that were competing for national titles and even shutting down and taking down the likes of an Ohio State and Alabama at the end of last year?
First of all, let me echo your yuck sentiments, because that was a horrible call, and it will have an impact on a very important game for Michigan this week. Because, yeah, there's a lot of inexperience on that defense, who is now going to be on the road in a tough environment, playing a team that's not as good as that's much better than what they saw last week. So you take Barham out, who is one of the more experienced players in that unit, and also one of the more disruptive players on that unit, and you are going to have to figure out a way to replace him. Now, the good news is, if Oklahoma's offensive line struggled against Illinois State, I think that Michigan will still be able to find success without him for a half. But you would like him in there because you want to be playing at peak capacity in a road game like this against a team like this in this kind of spotlight. But I do think the defense should be all right without him for a half, as long as he's, once he comes back in the second half. So it will be a very important thing for them to figure out ways to maybe generate or simulate pressure without just a 4 or 3-man rush like they could have possibly done with him. But that'll be up to Wink Martindale, and given his experience and his ability to show that he's done it throughout his career, I'm not that worried.
I would tend to agree with you. I think one of the interesting matchups is Brent Venables taking over the defense for Oklahoma. going against Bryce Underwood. That I think would be a significant advantage in this matchup, similar to what we saw. Now, Matt Patricia, different background, NFL background, but we saw him completely confusing Arch Manning in his first big start on the road. The one big difference is I do think they're going to have to be accountable for Bryce Underwood with his legs. And that's sort of both of these quarterbacks are mobile. If they are confused, they can make something out of nothing. So you might have a great scheme. You might have a rusher get free. You just have to make sure that you stay after him, that your DBs, secondary players are staying with their receivers, or else you could possibly see that. But I'm kind of curious to see that Brent Venables game plan against Bryce Underwood on the road in a hostile environment with a pretty filthy defensive line like our Mason Thomas, Marvin Jones Jr. That, to me, I think is going to be an interesting matchup in itself, too. Oh,
Bud, you're muted.
Did we get him?
Oh, did we get him on
with the mute button.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
So looking at this, I think the one advantage Michigan may have is the ability to run the football, right? Whereas we saw Oklahoma not have much of a run game at all. Oklahoma's also playing 2 true freshman starters on the offensive line. So, yeah, Michigan won't have Barham, and that's a huge loss, and that's an absolute nonsense rule. We should just bring back the spearing penalty and let guys play football, especially take out the suspension aspect of it afterwards. But 2 true freshman offensive linemen for Oklahoma, I do think that's something Michigan can probably exploit. And, if you're Oklahoma, if you don't have a run game, you're going to drop Mateer back like 45, 50 times in this game? Like, that's a lot to put on the guys. And I'm curious, how many times can Michigan create free runners at the quarterback by confusing those young offensive linemen for the Sooners?
Something to watch for sure. It's a huge game with big implications for both teams and both conferences. Anytime we get a Big Ten SEC clash, it'll generate a lot of conversation. You can watch that game 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Well, coming up on the other side, a team that the Cover 3 podcast has been extremely dialed in on and very much celebrated. We are a Luke Altmaier podcast. Luke Altmaier going on the road to take on Manny Diaz's Duke Blue Devils. We'll take you inside that matchup and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast live on CBS Sports Network. The Illinois Fighting Illini had a terrific season in 2024. You hit that awesome double-digit wins after the bowl victory against South Carolina, and you bring back a lot from last year's team for this season, including starting quarterback Luke Altmaier. Now, we had a chance to speak with Altmaier at the Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas last month, and we asked him for who would be the wide receivers that step up to replace the very productive and talented Pat Bryant and Zachariah Franklin. Now, he gave us a list of names that looked like a CVS receipt. No free ads. But, Tom, I've got to ask, after seeing that opener against Western Illinois, do you know anything more about what this offense is going to look like in 2025?
Nope. I do not. I think 9 different players caught passes for Illinois in the opener last week. Now, Hank Beatty, the senior among the bunch, he caught 5 for 108 yards. He had the biggest day of all of them, but nobody else on the team of the other 8 guys to catch passes caught more than 25 yards. Justin Bowick, a transfer from Ball State, caught 2 touchdowns. He was the clear favorite option in the red zone, as was tight end Tanner Arkin. So they're still mixing it around. Nobody, I think, has emerged as an alpha. I think Hank Beatty having that kind of game is a good sign for him this season. He also returned a punt for a touchdown, which was the first Illini punt return touchdown in 12 years. So there was a lot of first times for the Illini last week against Western Illinois. But overall, I don't know how much we could take away from anything that we saw in that game, because it was clear they were trying to get everybody involved, trying to get everybody's feet wet with a big game coming up this week on the road against Duke. So I can't say, I don't think we should take anything clear away from it. No, I think this is still very much a work in progress, and they are still going to see if somebody emerges as the true alpha among that group.
I'm also curious to see how many passes Illinois is actually going to throw against Duke. If I'm Illinois, I'm taking my super veteran offensive line. Brett Bielema said, to us there at Big Ten Media Day, it was one of the best he's ever had. Big stable of running backs, veteran quarterback to get them in the right play, to get them in the right pass or run check. And I'm taking my sweet time, guys, because Duke is going to go fast as heck. They want to chuck it all over the yard. I think Bielema's going to throw this thing back to like Stone Age Wisconsin days and try to possess the ball for 45 minutes and have maybe a 15 pass to 45 run ratio. Keep the ball away from Duke, try to pound on them physically, and not let Duke get to play 75, not let Duke get to play 85 or shoot, even play 90 to where your defense is gassed. They're really figuring out what you can't cover that day. Limit Duke's opportunities. I expect a lot of run game. So, and maybe minimize the effect of Illinois not having a true number one receiver to this point.
Totally. And I think one of the strengths of Duke is their secondary. It might be one of the better aspects of this team that's still, as the defensive linebackers are kind of figuring their things out. Chandler Rivers is a pretty good player at corner. They've got some pretty good talent there. And with your question mark, still hoping somebody would step it up at the wide receiver position, I think you lean on Duke. I mean, this is a Big Ten team going into ACC territory. I know it'll be a pretty good crowd there at Wallace Wade in Durham, but I do think this is one. I totally agree with Bud. I think this is one where you lean on them, you minimize the exposure in the pass game if you don't have to, and you let your defense cook, where I do think, again, another area where there's going to be a pretty significant advantage is Illinois' defensive front versus Duke's offensive line.
Danny, want to get this started back with you. Quick side note here, locals corner, but Manny Diaz said if you are a fourth-year student at Duke, you've seen 26 wins in the last 3 years. You've rushed the field multiple times after wins against ranked teams. Illinois coming in as a ranked team, there is an expectation that Duke is going to be able to go in and compete and give themselves a chance to win this game. Now, if they are going to win this game, they're going to need a better start than they had against Elon. Darian Mensah finished with a great stat line, but if we were going to spend some time, talking about the garbage time all-stars, the Blue Devils poured on a lot of points late in that game. Danny, as a Elon supporter, I know that you're dialed into this one. What do you think they have in Darian Mensah in that Jonathan Brewer-led system in Durham?
He's special. I mean, there's a reason. Malik Murphy was pretty good, and they thought they would upgrade. Man, 9-win season last year, and they said, you know what? We think we can get better. So you like the standard that they've set. The thing that worries me for Darian Mensah is he's got a young tackle on the left side of the line that's going to be going against Gabe Akis, who, by the way, he was already impressive last year, had a couple sacks last week. He looks like a game record type opponent. So I don't know. We were talking about Illinois being able to run the football. I worry a little bit about a game where Duke could be made one-dimensional if Darian Mensah can just put this team on the back and get a lot of yards, a lot of production through the air. And so that, to me, is the big concern for Duke. And they could. I mean, I think he's pretty dynamic. I think they have pretty good wide receivers. They had 4 different guys go over 50-plus yards, so they were able to spread it around somewhat. But if you can make anybody one-dimensional and completely shut down their run and have Mensah running around a little bit, I don't think that bodes well for Duke.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting matchup to watch as far as Duke's offense versus the Illinois defense, because all offseason, the thought process was Illinois had a very talented secondary. That's where they had pretty much everybody coming back on the defensive side of the ball, whereas the defensive line had lost a couple of key guys and they were bringing in new starters, although Gabe Akis did return. So the thought process was going to be the secondary is going to be very good. The defensive line's a work in progress. Aaron Henry, the Illini defensive coordinator all summer, was like, no, actually, our defensive line might be the best unit we have. It's the best one we've certainly had since I've been here. And based on what we saw last week against Western Illinois, I understand why Aaron Henry felt that way, because even though it was Western Illinois, the Illinois defensive line looked phenomenal. Now I wonder how they're going to look against a Duke offensive line on the road, where they're not just going to be able to overwhelm these guys with size and speed like they were able to do Western Illinois. So that is going to be a huge matchup. And I also wonder if the plan for Illinois, besides slowing things down on offense to keep that Duke offense off the field, will be to kind of take the Lenora Sellers plan that we saw in the bowl game last year, where they are just going to let him sit in the pocket and figure it out. They are not going to let him be a one read and go kind of guy, which he is at times. And we saw a lot last year in Tulane, especially when things weren't going well. He was scrambling a lot. That was his tendency. So Illinois is probably going to try to pen him in and make him make decisions and reads over the middle of the field to get things done. Whether or not he's able to do so will probably determine the outcome of this game. But don't make no mistake about this. It's a 2.5-point spread for a reason. I know Illinois is favored, but these are two very equal teams, and Duke could easily win this game.
The phrase used to be, hey, they're on scholarship too. I think in the rev share era, it's like, hey, they're paying up too, and Duke is certainly paying up. We know just from the reporting in the offseason, Duke has a heck of a lot of money. This is a good roster. I'm curious to see how effectively Duke can spread out Illinois. How does Illinois handle some of this four wide, some of this empty set stuff that Duke might want to do? Can you isolate some of these Illinois linebackers in coverage? I don't know that's a liability, but it's something I think Duke should probably test early and often. And if you're Duke, you are facing a very veteran quarterback. It's not saying that Altmaier is perfect, but we saw in the opening weekend a lot of young guy mistakes from first-time starters, and having Altmaier there as a fifth-year senior for Illinois, should help them. But man, Duke still dials up a lot of really fun, exotic stuff. Pressure packages. Altmaier's going to have to be on his game mentally and also be on the same page as his receivers in their response to some of this pressure stuff. They need to cut their routes off at the right time and the right depth. They need to work in conjunction. I think that's why it probably just you limit how many passes you throw and you try to just stick with the run game if it's working at all.
Golly, I'm fired up now. I'm sorry. I just, we spend so much time looking at all the week 1 matchups. They just stare at us on the calendar. And then you really throw yourself at week 2 and you realize all the fun chess matches that are about to unfold, not just this week, but all the weeks to come. And we love breaking them down here with you every single Tuesday, noon Eastern time hour on CBS Sports Network. Well, coming up on the other side, we take you inside the matchup of one of the sport's great rivalries. It's Iowa and Iowa State, the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy, keys to the game, X factors, and more. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network, going inside some of the biggest matchups in the Big Ten ahead for week 2. And if you are in the state, this is one of the best moments of the entire calendar year. It is the annual rivalry between Iowa and Iowa State, the Cy-Hawk Trophy. I mean, this is a matchup that sort of has a character unto itself, and especially right here in the early part of the college football calendar in recent years. Before we get to the trends or expectations of the series, I want to specifically spotlight the Iowa Hawkeyes because there is a quarterback who our guy Danny Kanell was big bullish on. I mean, big time. So Danny, and then look, I understand the opponent here, but help me wrap my head around 8 for 15 for 44 yards there in the opening week. Were they sandbagging? Is there more? Is Mark Gronowski going to show us a little bit more in terms of changing the tune for this Iowa offense?
I hope so. I think they did. I think this was one of those ones. You got the final win, 34-7, completely comfortable. They're going to have to ask him to do more. Reese Vanderzee, one of their better wide receivers, was lost a couple days before the game. Their running back goes down. They have to go to a freshman running back. I think they probably were thinking a little bit along the lines, let's make sure we get the win and get out of here. Don't forget either, how much do you want to expose Gronowski when you don't have to? He's coming off of surgery himself where he missed the entire spring. So I'm not that panicked yet. I'm still bullish on Mark Gronowski being the quarterback. Thought he was very efficient. Didn't ask him to do a whole lot. And maybe Tim Lester was just keeping a couple things close to the vest for this big game in week 2 against a rival.
Bud?
I'm interested to see.
Didn't ask him to do a whole.
Good.
Go ahead, Bud.
I'm interested to see how this Iowa back 7 responds to an Iowa State offense that has looked okay throwing the ball so far. Obviously, they lost a lot of weapons to the NFL. Iowa's defensive line is still pretty nasty. We saw Iowa State's offensive line have kind of a pretty workmanlike performance in week 0 there in Ireland against Kansas State. But this will be a test. Like who is more ready right now? Some of the new players you have in the Iowa back 7 or these new Iowa State receivers. They brought in Sowell from East Carolina. He's been a complete no-show. But you have seen some other guys on that team step up. So we'll have to see if that can continue.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all, Danny, if you're right. They might have been holding some stuff back knowing that this game was coming because this is a huge rivalry game in the state. And Iowa State didn't really have that same convenience because they had to start their year with Kansas State and Ireland, so they couldn't really go vanilla in that one. But I would hope that Mark Gronowski shows us more in this game than he did last week, because the numbers were truly uninspiring if you watched Iowa's offense last week. But the good news is the running game was still very effective. Xavier Williams rushed for 122 yards and 11 carries. And unlike last season where it seemed to be the Caleb Johnson show, it looks like the Hawkeyes have a bit more depth at that position that they're confident in to be able to mix guys in for carries and keep everybody fresh late into the game. So that's a good sign. And if there is a decent reason to be optimistic about this matchup for the Iowa offense, it's this. Iowa State's looked very good through its first 2 games. It's 2-0. It won by like 1,000 points last week. But I've seen Iowa State play twice now, and I still haven't seen a pass rush. Like, I don't know if it exists. There's really nothing to speak of as far as the production that they're getting on that side of the ball. So Gronowski should have plenty of time. And also, Iowa State's defense has given up a lot of explosive plays through 2 weeks. We saw it against Kansas State in the opener in Ireland a couple of weeks ago. Can Iowa figure out a way to expose that back end a little bit and get some big plays in the passing game? That would be very much against the trend of Iowa offense over the last 40, 50 years at this point, but the opportunity should be there. Can Gronowski take advantage of them?
Well, speaking of trends, Tom, there is just going to be one of these narratives. You know, we pick these games. We've got our Locks pod every single Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And this series has some very, very stark trends in terms of the style of games that we tend to see and in terms of the scoring that we tend to see. So given your concern about or at least like identifying a spot where Iowa's offense might be able to have some success, do you maybe see a stray from what we have seen? I mean, I think we're like 17-3 to the under in this series over the last 20 meetings. Do you think this will be more along that line, or could we see something that's perhaps a little bit more higher scoring?
I mean, I think if you look at the total for this game, it's at 41.5. I wouldn't be surprised if you see an over. I think that, as I mentioned, this Iowa State defense has been pretty leaky. Again, like it was against Kansas State. It wouldn't shock me at all to see if Iowa was able to break some big explosive plays, because that's what Iowa did last year. That's pretty much what the entire offense was predicated on with Caleb Johnson. It would be 2-yard gain, 2-yard gain, 2-yard gain, bam, 70-yard touchdown run. That's how it worked. And then they were able to sprinkle in a bit more passing because of it. So I think that's going to be the game plan. I do wonder who's going to emerge at wide receiver or even tight end to be the guy that proves his ability to do so. But Iowa State's going to give you opportunities. And then on the flip side, I think Rocco Becht and this offense will be able to find some spots where they can get after this Iowa defense too. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you we're in for like a 38-35 kind of shootout, but I could see 27-20.
Yeah, Tom, especially with number 95, Big Dom Orange in the middle there for Iowa State. That's a player we've been hyping for quite a while on this podcast. Iowa State finally got him in shape. He wrecked shop for sure against Kansas State, the big nose guard there for the Cyclones. If Iowa wants to stay committed to the run, they're going to have to find out a way to get him blocked, and that is a lot easier said than done. If you're Iowa State, after watching what Iowa did in the opening week, you're like, all right, yeah, maybe you guys can get that passing game to not awful status in 1 week, but we'll pay to see it.
We've got the last 5 games: 2019, 20-13, 10-7, 27-17, and 18-17. Chip, I'm with you. I'm going with the trends. I'm going with the trends. I'm saying this game is still going to be one of those low-scoring defensive affairs. I would love for Mark Gronowski to step up there and throw for 300 yards and light him up for a 40 burger. I just don't know how that's happening. I still want to see who they're going to have emerge as wide receiver too, because that has always been a question mark for them, and I'm curious to see who emerges for Iowa to be a legit threat on the outside.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible coming from Mr. Black is Due at the roulette table. I love that you're going to follow the trends on this one. All right, real quick here, about a minute here. Do you think Iowa State is good enough to win the Big 12? I say that as we were incredibly impressed with what Utah did. TCU's crimes that were committed on Monday night against North Carolina. Is Iowa State on that level with a Utah, with a TCU, or maybe even if you still believe in Texas Tech, though I don't know what we can take away. Danny first, do you believe that Iowa State's good enough to win the Big 12?
I mean, it's impossible to say no, I don't think they are, because this conference is so evenly matched, but I don't think they're going to win it.
Yeah.
Like, I think they could. I think you could make the case. I'm a little bit worried about the defense. I'm a little bit worried. Rocco Becht is really good, and I've disrespected him a lot on here. I think he's a really good, maybe the most underrated quarterback in the country. But for my money, if I was placing on a team in the Big 12, I would put it on Utah.
I would agree with that. If you look at this, they're not on the list of teams that you can just absolutely exclude as far as like there's no way they can win it. I think they are kind of on that list of teams that if they got considerably better in a few spots, receiver, the back end of the pass defense, they made it to the title game last year in this league. So I guess in theory they could win, but I don't look at them as one of the top 2 or 3 front runners just based on explosiveness we saw on the opening weekend and physicality that we saw as well, especially from Utah.
Yeah, I think Iowa State's capable of winning the Big 12, but they would not be my first choice. There's probably 3 other teams I would take ahead of them at this point, but it's anybody's league. That's why it's great.
Yep. Saturday, noon Eastern time, Iowa State. This one's going to be in Ames. Check out the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. Well, coming up on the other side, every single week, we like to leave you with a player to watch for the week ahead. Who have we identified in the Big Ten in week 2? We'll let you know and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast every single Tuesday, we like to leave you with a player to watch in the Big Ten, a chance to give a spotlight, let you know where to turn your eyes. Let's rock this thing clockwise. DK, who is your player to watch?
I'm going with Oregon running back, Mekhi Hughes. We talked about him earlier. We're talking about their week 1 win. He had 1 carry for 2 yards. I thought he was going to be a difference maker for this Oregon Duck offense. We'll see if he gets it going against Oklahoma State. Should have a tremendous opportunity to do so. I'll take Mekhi Hughes.
A lot of freshman quarterbacks or first-time starters last week struggled. One didn't. Maryland's Malik Washington looked very impressive in their win over Florida Atlantic. He threw for 285 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 6 yards per attempt, but he wasn't making mistakes. He was avoiding sacks. It was the kind of performance you want to see from a first-time starter. He's got another game this week against Northern Illinois. Let's see him continue and carry on and maybe push the ball down the field a little bit more.
I want to see Illinois defensive lineman James Thompson. This is a guy that Wisconsin was extremely excited about last year. Then he tore his pec, was lost for the year. He transferred to Illinois. All reports out of Illinois are that he looks great. He's going to be really important for Illinois as they take on a potent Duke offense this weekend.
I will be having my eye on Michigan State quarterback Aiden Childs because it is very clear that when we discuss the Spartans, everything is going to come down to how he can play, whether he can be productive, and whether he can avoid the kind of back-breaking mistakes that we saw. Michigan State's going up against Boston College. It is a sneaky important game in terms of flipping Michigan State's chances to have a successful season one way or the other. In the opener, we saw 17 for 23 for 155 yards, 1 touchdown. Very important, though, 0 interceptions. I think Childs needs to be a little bit sharper still, and him avoiding that kind of back-breaking mistake is, again, going to be the key to giving Michigan State a chance to win against Boston College. Well, if you like what you saw, if you like what you heard, come and join us because we are live on YouTube every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and on Saturday nights, 11:30 p.m. with an instant reaction to every single thing that we have seen. We would love for you to come and join us to continue the conversation at youtube.com/Cover3. And you can follow him on Twitter at Danny Kanell. You can follow him at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow him at Tom Fornelli. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
See ya.